sat there quietly for a few minutes and then answered, "A church family who loves me enough to take me in and let me stay with them when I need away from home," which had become more frequently this summer. She paused for a second and then said, "I totally agree." Then she went on to explain her home life as a kid and even now, and right in the middle of it, I realized that we both came from very similar backgrounds, and I began to cry. She then paused and sat silently for a few minutes before getting up out of her seat and coming to give me a hug, and apologized for making me cry. Shortly after she got done apologizing, we had to head to big church, so I did not have an opportunity to share my story with her for about an hour and a half. I sat through big church just thinking about whether or not I wanted her to know my story. Finally, at the after, I decided I wanted her to know my story. The after lasted about an hour, and then we had about an hour to get our lights out in our dorm. It took so long to start telling Rob Lee the beginning of my story that I was late getting to my dorm, and I hadn't even told Rob Lee my whole story. My story starts off with when I was 6 years old. At the age of 6, my parents got divorced. This was one of the first storms placed in my life. I used to love hanging out with my dad, but after my parents got divorced, my dad seemed to get mean. I began to grow farther apart from him, and because of the divorce, my entire family would go to church every Sunday, but shortly after the storm being placed in my life, my family stopped going to church. From the age of 6 until I was 14, I was not able to attend church on a regular basis. The only time I attended church was if I was with my grandma, which was about once a year. I think that my parents just gave up on trying to get us to church because of the storms placed in our lives. Just like everyone else, my parents have made mistakes, and some of their mistakes have directly affected me. Shortly after the divorce, my dad decided to get remarried, and I ended up with a stepmom and a stepsister who I did not get along with. I still don't get along with, and just probably never will. Right after my dad got remarried, my mom got remarried, which caused me to get a new stepdad who I never got along with, and he expected that he was going to come into my house and be my dad, which I had no desire to have a new dad because I had my own that had left me. My new stepdad and I fought constantly. We never agreed on anything, whether it was when he was coaching my basketball or softball team or at home. In February of 2012, my mom and stepdad got divorced, placing yet another storm in my life. After this divorce, I began not liking to stay at home. I was so thankful that in the spring of 2011, I had met Jay Ham in Kenny Bell, who helped me get back into church. On September 25th, 2011, during the Lord's Supper, I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. At the time, I felt a change, and I noticed that I had begun to change the way I acted, but I still wasn't living fully for God, like I should have. I had begun to go to people in my church as a way to get away from the storms in my life, but none of them knew the details to my story. They just knew that I had problems at home. I knew Rob Lee for about 2 days when I opened up and told her my home story because hers was really close to mine. I will never forget her story. She has made a huge impact on my life. Before it had come time for the trip, I tried to get my youth pastor to let me go to Super Summer JV because I did not know any of the older kids, but he had told me it was against the rules. As a result of him telling me this, I had considered not even going to church camp because at that point, so many storms had been placed in my life. I didn't know if God really had a purpose for my life or not. I'm so glad that Dusty didn't let me go to JV because if he had, I wouldn't have met Rob Lee. Rob Lee has changed my life. She helped me realize that I wasn't living for God like I should and that God has a purpose for me. God is using the storms in my life to help prepare for that. To help me prepare for that purpose like he did with the storms in Rob Lee's life. I have had 2 fatherly figures in my life leave me in the past 9 years, which scares me to get real close to anyone because I'm afraid that when I do, they will leave me too. Robley may live 7.5 hours away from me, but she can't help that. We will always be close friends. Robley taught me that I am a daughter of the God Most High, who will never leave me. He loves me and will use me. As a result of Super Summer and meeting Robley, I've decided to give my life totally for Christ, and not just 50%. I've never met someone before this trip that I connected with right away like I did Robley. At the beginning of Super Summer, Robley had said she was disappointed that she did not get to work with her church's camp. But by the end of the week, she had told me that she wasn't disappointed anymore because she had finally filled God's purpose for her by meeting me. We both agreed that it was all a work of God bringing us together to Super Summer. God knew that we needed each other and brought us together by placing us in the same family group. I'm very thankful that God did so. I now know God does have a purpose for me. No matter how many storms are placed in my life, that in the end, I'm here for a purpose. I am a daughter of the God Most High, who loves me and will never leave me, and God will use me. I know my purpose now and hope to fulfill it like Robley has done. Robley told me, God is always at work. Keep your eyes open to see what is said, and don't be afraid of what God places in your path. My life has been changed in 5 short days. I hope never to go back to my old ways. I have to be an example to my family no matter how hard things get. When people hurt us, it's an opportunity to show them the love of God and how God has changed our lives. It was no coincidence that Robley and I met each other. God brought us together for a purpose.